"Is this some kind of joke?" asked the young man in the tailored tuxedo, his voice dripping with incredulity as he stared down at the seat of honor. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield, his knuckles white from the pressure of his grip. Douglas Ramsey, 82 years old and sitting as still as a stone statue, did not immediately answer. He kept his hands folded over the head of his cane, his eyes fixed on the empty stage ahead. The auditorium was vast, smelling of lemon polish and expensive perfume, the air conditioning humming a low, steady bass note beneath the rising murmur of the gathering crowd. "Excuse me, sir. I am speaking to you," the young man said, louder this time. He snapped his fingers once, a sharp, biting sound that cut through the immediate vicinity. "Do you have any idea where you are sitting?" Douglas slowly turned his head. His neck was stiff, a souvenir from a hard landing in a jungle clearing half a century ago. But his movement was deliberate. He looked up at the man, whose name tag read Julian Thorne, Senior Event Coordinator. Douglas's face was a map of deep lines and weathered skin, contrasting sharply with the smooth, flushed complexion of the coordinator. "I am sitting exactly where I was told to sit," Douglas said. His voice was gravel, low and rasping, like tires rolling over loose stones. Julian let out a short, mocking laugh, looking around at his assistant, a nervous young woman clutching a tablet. "Did you hear that, Sarah? He was told to sit here." Julian turned back to Douglas, leaning in closer, invading the old man's personal space. "Sir, this implies that someone authorized you to occupy the seat reserved for the keynote speaker. This is the front row center. This is for dignitaries. Look at yourself." Julian gestured vaguely at Douglas's attire. It was the point of contention, the red flag that had drawn Julian across the room like a shark sensing blood in the water. Douglas was not wearing a tuxedo. He was not wearing a dress uniform with a chest full of brass. He was wearing a faded crimson windbreaker made of a nylon material that had gone out of style 3 decades ago. The cuffs were frayed, and the zipper had lost its shine. It was a utilitarian garment, something one might wear to walk a dog on a rainy Tuesday, not to a gala celebrating military excellence in the heart of the capital. "I know what I am wearing, son," Douglas said softly. "It is offensive," Julian hissed. "This is a black tie event. We have senators arriving in 10 minutes. We have generals. We have foreign diplomats. And you are sitting here looking like you wandered in from a bus stop to get out of the rain. You need to move, now." Douglas shifted slightly, the plastic seat creaking under his weight. He adjusted the collar of the red jacket. There was a patch on the left breast, small and embroidered with thread that had long since lost its vibrancy. It was unrecognizable to the civilian eye, just a blur of gold and black stitching against the red nylon. "I'm not moving," Douglas said. He turned his eyes back to the stage. The audacity of the refusal seemed to short-circuit Julian's composure. He straightened up, smoothing down his silk lapels, his face turning a shade of angry pink. The auditorium was filling up. Men in high-collared dress blues and women in shimmering evening gowns were filing down the aisles, their laughter and chatter creating a wall of sound. Several people in the rows behind them were already whispering, pointing at the incongruous sight of the old man in the cheap red jacket sitting in the most prestigious seat in the house. Julian felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. This was his event. His promotion depended on this night going flawlessly. Every seat had to be perfect. Every dignitary had to be appeased. And right there, like a stain on a pristine tablecloth, sat Douglas Ramsey. "Sir, I am not asking you," Julian said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I am telling you, you are trespassing in a reserved zone. If you have a ticket, which I highly doubt, it is for the balcony. If you do not move in the next 30 seconds, I will have security drag you out of here. Do you understand? I will have you humiliated in front of everyone." Douglas closed his eyes for a brief second. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he didn't see the angry event coordinator. He saw the flash of tracer fire cutting through a pitch-black canopy. He felt the damp, suffocating heat of extraction zone. He felt the weight of a young soldier thrown over his shoulder, the nylon of his jacket slick with mud and oil. He remembered the promise he had made then, a promise that had brought him to this chair 50 years later. "I understand you have a job to do," Douglas said, opening his eyes. "But so do I." "Job," Julian scoffed. "You're senile. That's what this is. Sarah, get security. Get the big guys from the south entrance. Tell them we have a disturbance in row A." Sarah hesitated, looking at Douglas. There was something about the old man's stillness that unnerved her. Most people, when confronted by authority or public embarrassment, shrank away. They fidgeted. They looked down. Douglas Ramsey sat with the immense heavy gravity of a mountain. He didn't look defiant. He looked absolute. "Go," Julian snapped at her. Sarah scurried away up the aisle, her heels clicking rapidly on the polished floor. Julian crossed his arms, standing guard over Douglas as if to prevent him from bolting, though Douglas showed no inclination to move a muscle. "You're making a mistake," Douglas said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same neutral tone one might use to say it was going to rain. "The only mistake was letting you through the front door," Julian retorted. He checked his watch. The VIP motorcade was 5 minutes out. Panic began to claw at his throat. If the general walked in and saw this dishevelment in the front row, heads would roll. Julian's head specifically. "Look at this," Julian muttered, reaching out and flicking the collar of Douglas's jacket with his finger. "It's disgusting. It's probably covered in fleas. Have you no respect for the uniform? Have you no respect for the men and women we are honoring tonight? This ceremony is for heroes. It is for men of valor. It is not a homeless shelter." Douglas's hand moved. It was a blur, faster than a man of his age should have been capable of. He didn't strike Julian. He simply intercepted Julian's hand as it flicked the collar again, catching the young man's wrist in a grip that felt like a steel vise. "Don't touch the jacket," Douglas whispered. The volume of his voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop 10 degrees. His blue eyes, usually watery with age, suddenly hardened into chips of glacial ice. Julian gasped, trying to yank his hand back, but he was frozen. He stared down at the old man's hand, knobby, scarred with liver spots, and realized with a shock that he was physically overpowered. The strength in those fingers was unnatural. It was the hysterical strength of a man who had held on to lifelines when letting go meant death. "Let go of me," Julian squeaked, his voice cracking. Douglas held him for 1 second longer, letting the message sink in, then released him. Julian stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, his eyes wide with shock and indignation. "Assault," Julian cried out, looking around for validation. "He just assaulted me." People in the nearby rows turned fully now. The murmurs grew into a buzz of scandal. A woman in the second row, dripping in diamonds, leaned forward and whispered loudly to her husband. "Why hasn't someone removed him? It's disgraceful." Douglas adjusted his cuffs. He did not look back at the woman. He did not look at Julian. He sat forward slightly, resting his chin on his hands, waiting. High above the auditorium floor in the technical booth, a young man named Corporal Hernandez was monitoring the security feeds. He had been watching the altercation on the main camera. He saw the event coordinator berating the old man. He saw the flick of the collar. He saw the grip on the wrist. Hernandez zoomed the camera in. The image on his monitor blurred for a second before sharpening in high definition on the old man's chest. Hernandez was looking for a credential, a badge, something to identify the intruder. Instead, his eyes locked onto the faded patch on the red jacket. The color drained from Hernandez's face. He knew that patch. He had seen it in the history books during basic training. He had seen it in the classified archives during his rotation at the Pentagon. It was a unit that technically didn't exist on paper for 20 years. A search and rescue unit that went where angels feared to tread. He zoomed in further, catching the side of the old man's face. Hernandez pulled up a facial recognition database, his fingers flying across the keyboard. It took 3 seconds for a match. Subject Ramsey. Douglas. Rank Sergeant Major, retired. Status: highly classified, living legend. Notes: Medal of Honor declined. Distinguished Service Cross 3X. Silver Star 5X. Hernandez felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He grabbed his radio, bypassing the event security channel and switching directly to the command frequency used by the arriving VIP detail. "Command. This is Overwatch," Hernandez said, his voice trembling slightly. "Go ahead, Overwatch," a crisp voice replied. "Sir, we have a code red situation in the auditorium. Front row, center seat. Is there a threat?" The voice on the radio sharpened instantly. "No, sir. I mean, yes, but not to the VIPs. The threat is to the event staff. They are attempting to forcibly remove a guest. Hernandez, we are 2 minutes out. Handle it. We don't have time for seating disputes." "Sir, you don't understand," Hernandez pleaded, watching on the screen as 2 large security guards approached Douglas. "The guest is Douglas Ramsey. He is wearing the red jacket." There was silence on the radio. Total, absolute dead air. It lasted for 5 seconds, which in radio time is an eternity. "Say that again, Overwatch," the voice came back, lower this time. "Dangerous. Douglas Ramsey is in the objective area. The event coordinator has engaged him. Security is moving to hands-on." The response was immediate and terrifying. "Stop them." "Sir, I'm in the booth. I can't." "Stop them, Hernandez. That is a direct order." The general is listening. We are breaching. Down on the floor, the situation had reached a boiling point. Julian, emboldened by the arrival of the two burly security guards, had regained his sneer. There he is. Julian pointed a shaking finger at Douglas. He assaulted me. He is trespassing. Get him out of here. Drag him if you have to. The security guards, hired contractors who looked like they spent more time lifting weights than reading personnel files, loomed over Douglas. One of them, a man with a shaved head and a neck as wide as a tree trunk, stepped forward. "Sir, you need to come with us," the guard rumbled. Douglas looked up. He didn't see a guard. He saw an obstacle. He was tired. His hip ached. He just wanted to see the ceremony. He wanted to see if the young ones remembered. "I'm staying," Douglas said. The guard reached out, grabbing Douglas by the upper arm. The fabric of the red jacket bunched up under the heavy hand. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, old-timer," the guard said. At that exact moment, the side doors of the auditorium, the VIP entrance, didn't just open. They were thrown wide with such force that they banged against the magnetic stops. The sound was like a gunshot. The entire auditorium went silent. Julian turned, expecting to see the senator, ready to smooth things over with a charming smile. Instead, a phalanx of uniformed soldiers marched in. They weren't wearing the dress blues of the ceremony. They were wearing full combat rattled berets, sidearms, serious faces. They moved with a fluidity and violence of action that terrified the civilians in the front rows. In the center of the formation strode General Marcus Vance, 4 stars on his shoulder, 6 feet 4 inches of hardened iron. He was known as the Hammer for a reason. His face was a thundercloud. The formation didn't head for the stage. They didn't head for the podium. They cut straight across the plush carpet toward row A. Julian froze. He assumed wildly that this was part of the show. Or perhaps they were here to arrest the crazy old man. Yes, that must be it. The general had seen the security risk and was handling it personally. "General," Julian called out, stepping forward, regaining his composure. "Thank God you're here. We have a situation. This man refuses to—" General Vance didn't even look at Julian. He walked through him. He didn't shove him. He simply occupied the space Julian was standing in with such authority that Julian was forced to scramble backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on the carpet. The security guard holding Douglas's arm looked up and saw the general bearing down on him. The guard's eyes went wide. He let go of Douglas as if the red jacket had suddenly turned white hot. General Vance stopped 3 feet from Douglas. The soldiers fanned out, creating a perimeter, facing outward, putting their backs to Douglas and the general, staring down the crowd and the security guards. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. You could hear the heavy breathing of the security guard. General Vance looked down at Douglas. He looked at the frayed cuffs. He looked at the cheap zipper. He looked at the patch that no one else had recognized. Then slowly, deliberately, the general dropped to one knee. The gasp from the audience was audible. A 4-star general, the highest-ranking officer in the hemisphere, was kneeling on the floor of a hotel ballroom in front of an old man in a windbreaker. "Sergeant Major," Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. Douglas looked at the general. A small smile cracked his weathered face. "You're late, Marcus." "I got held up in traffic," Vance replied, his voice trembling. He reached out and gently touched the red jacket. "I didn't think you'd come. You haven't left the cabin in 10 years. I heard you were getting your 4th star," Douglas said. "I figured someone had to be here to make sure your head didn't get too big for the hat." Vance laughed, a wet, choked sound. He stood up, offering his hand. Douglas took it. Vance pulled him up, but he didn't just help him stand. He braced him. Then General Vance turned to the room. He didn't let go of Douglas's hand. Julian was scrambling to his feet, dusting off his tuxedo. "General, I apologize for the disturbance. This man was—" Silence. Vance's voice was a cannon shot. It didn't need a microphone. It bounced off the back walls of the auditorium. Julian clamped his mouth shut. Vance looked at the security guards who were currently backing away, looking for an exit. He looked at Julian. He looked at the wealthy donors and the politicians in the front rows who had been whispering about the eyesore in seat 1. "You wanted to remove this man?" Vance asked, his voice dangerously quiet now. "You thought he didn't belong?" Julian stammered. "Sir, it's a formal event. The dress code, he's wearing a windbreaker." Vance looked at the red jacket. Then he looked at Julian with an expression of profound pity and disgust. "This is not a windbreaker," Vance said, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "This is the unit jacket of the 77th Air Rescue Squadron, specifically the Red Devils." Vance pointed to the faded patch. "You don't see these anymore because almost every man who wore one died wearing it. They flew into fire that would melt the paint off a tank." They went into valleys where entire battalions had been wiped out, just to bring back one living soldier. Vance placed a hand on Douglas's shoulder. In 1972, a helicopter was shot down in the Ashau Valley. The pilot was 19 years old. He was trapped in the burning wreckage. The enemy was closing in on all sides. The extraction was called off. Too hot. Suicide mission. The crowd was entranced. Julian was pale, but one man didn't listen to the abort order. Vance continued. One man cut his line, dropped from the hover, and ran into the fire. He pulled that pilot out. He carried him 3 miles through the jungle with a shattered ankle, hunted by 100 enemy soldiers. He kept that pilot alive for 2 days until they could be extracted. Vance paused, looking at Douglas. That pilot was my father. The revelation hit the room like a physical wave. Hands covered mouths. Tears sprang to eyes. Julian looked as if he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. And this jacket. Vance touched the red nylon again. This is the jacket he wrapped my father in to keep him from going into shock. This jacket has my father's blood on the lining. It has the mud of that valley in the fibers. Vance turned his gaze back to Julian, his eyes burning. You told him he wasn't dressed for the occasion. Son, this man is wearing the most expensive garment in this room. Your tuxedo cost $2,000. This jacket cost him his youth. It cost him his health. It cost him his friends. Vance looked at the crowd. You asked if he had a ticket. Vance roared. He paid for his seat in blood. He paid for your seats in blood. The general stepped back and snapped to attention. He was rigid, perfect, a towering figure of authority. He raised his hand in a slow, sharp salute. It wasn't a perfunctory salute. It was the salute a subordinate gives to a superior, a salute of absolute reverence. Sergeant Major Ramsey. Vance barked. Douglas straightened up. The years seemed to fall off him. The hunch in his back vanished. He dropped his cane. He didn't need it. He stood tall, his chin up, his chest out. He returned the salute, his hand slicing the air with a precision that 50 years hadn't dulled. The 2 men stood there, locked in a moment of silent communication that transcended the room, the crowd, and the decades. Then, slowly, the applause started. It began with the soldiers in the security detail. Then the senator stood up. Then the mayor. Then, row by row, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The applause grew into a roar, a thunderous ovation that shook the chandeliers. Julian Thorne did not clap. He stood frozen, shrinking into himself, wishing he could disappear. General Vance lowered his salute. He turned to his aide. Captain. Yes, General. Escort Mr. Thorne out of the building. He is no longer required here, but the ceremony, Julian whispered. The ceremony is about honor, Vance said coldly. You have shown you understand nothing of it. Get out. Julian was led away by 2 stone-faced MPs. He walked past Douglas, unable to meet the old man's eyes. Douglas watched him go, then looked at Vance. You didn't have to do that, Marcus. The boy just didn't know. He knows now, Vance said. The general gestured to the empty seat next to Douglas, the one reserved for the general himself. I believe this seat is taken, Vance asked. Douglas smiled. It is now. Vance sat down next to Douglas. He didn't go to the podium. He didn't go to the VIP holding area. He sat in the front row, shoulder to shoulder with the old man in the red jacket. The ceremony began. The speeches were made. Awards were handed out, but no one was looking at the stage. Their eyes kept drifting to the front row, where a 4-star general sat leaning in, listening intently to an old man whispering stories, the red nylon jacket standing out like a beacon of glory in a sea of black and white. Later that evening, after the confetti had been swept away and the dignitaries had departed in their limousines, Douglas and Vance stood outside the hotel entrance. The night air was cool. Can I give you a ride, Doug? Vance asked. The motorcade is waiting. Douglas shook his head. No thank you, sir. I've got my truck around the corner. She still runs, mostly. Vance smiled. You know, you could have worn the medal. I know, Douglas said. He patted the chest of his jacket. But I like this better. It keeps me warm, and it reminds me of the boys who didn't get to come home and get old and grumpy like me. Vance nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Douglas turned to leave, leaning heavily on his cane again. He took a few steps, then stopped and looked back at the general. Marcus? Yes, Doug? You did good tonight. Your father would be proud. Vance watched him go. He watched the red jacket fade into the shadows of the streetlights. He stood there for a long time, long after the old man had disappeared, standing guard over the empty street, honoring the giant who had walked among them. The next day, a memo went out from the Department of Defense. It was short and to the point. It mandated that all event staff for military functions undergo a new training module. The module was titled History, Heritage, and Respect. The cover image for the training manual was a grainy, zoomed-in photograph taken from a security camera. It was a picture of a faded red patch with gold stitching, and underneath it a single quote, "Stand. He earned it." If you enjoyed this story of justice in history, please like, share, and subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories. Help us keep the legacy alive.